Good morning, everyone. Back to Daf Yomi. We are Nun Beis, Amud Beis, second Mishnah on the page, extended edition. Correct. Today's Daf Yomi, the month's Daf Yomi, is sponsored by the Durbach Abudi and Mandel families in honor of the engagement of Shul Harris to Meira Mandel. May they build a bayis neman b'Yisrael filled with Torah, simcha, and bracha. Today we will be having a fairly technical sugya, where we're going to have one of those sugyas where we're going to say, what do we learn from this part of a pasuk according to this opinion, and who uses this verse and who uses that? So a chart is in order. I would like to acknowledge that this chart comes from the Daf Yomi Advancement Forum, dafyomi.co.il, which is where I printed it off from.
Which is based in Israel.
It is the same as these guys. Wow. Yes, Daf Yomi Shiur.
Based in Israel. No?
Based in Israel. I got this from their English charts sections on today's Daf. And they get credit for this nice chart. Okay, would save me some time last night because it was a quick turnaround.
Yeah, no kidding.
Says the Mishnah, mitzvahs hanechenkin. So the mitzvah of strangulation. Hayu meshakin oso bezevel ad arkivosov. First, they needed to restrain him, and the way they did that is the same way. They had manure up to his knees. They would take a thick, coarse scarf and they would wrap it with a nicer material, a lighter material. And wrap that around his neck. This one pulls towards him. This one pulls towards him. Until he dies. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan and rabbis learn ish. So it says that this talking about the psukim regarding committing adultery. It says ish prat lekaton, so that means it has to be an adult, not a minor. Asher yin off as ishes ish, who has an adulterous relationship with the wife of another man. Prat leishes katon. That indicates that the wife of somebody who is also a minor is also not considered his wife. Right? That is not there's no kiddusha midoraisa for a child who is not 13. So therefore, that isn't going to be considered to be an adulterous relationship. Eishes re'ehu, the wife of his friend, prat le'eishes achirim. So that comes to exclude a wife of a non-Jew, right? Because there's no chiyuv misa there. Non-Jews do not have kiddushin in the same way, and so therefore the marriage doesn't consider to be an adulterous relationship. Most yumas bechenek. So they die, right? Somebody considers that was the classic example of a case of having a adulterous relationship with a married woman was punishment of chenek. Ata omer bechenek, you think it means chenek. O ena el bachas mikol misas b'Torah. Doesn't say in the pasuk what the misa is, what kind of death sentence it is. So maybe it's one of the other death sentences. So we had a rule, kol makom shenemar misa b'Torah stam, whenever the Torah says you get the death penalty, but it doesn't specify which death penalty that it is, ein ata rashai lemoshcha. So lahachmir aleh. You're not allowed, in order to make it more stringent, right, that you can't do, ella lahak aleha. So, rather, is it aleh or aleha? It is, just want to make sure I pronounce that right, aleha, right? Rather, we're going to make it the most lenient punishment possible. So therefore, we're going to go to the most lenient of death sentences. Divrei Rabbi Yoshia, that's what Rabbi Yoshia says. Rabbi Yonasan says, lo mipnei shehi kal. It's not that it's the lightest or the most easy misa. Ella kol misa amur b'Torah stam ein ela chenek. We just have a rule that anytime the death penalty is mentioned in the Torah, it refers to chenek. So Rebbe Omer Nemar Misa Bidei Shemayim. So Rebbe explains that it says that there's such a concept of Misa by the hands of Shemayim. There are some punishments that Hashem kills a person for committing those averos. V'Nemar Misa Bidei Odom. And it also says that there's such crimes as the punishment is Misa by a Beis Din. Misa Amura Bidei Shemayim, Misa She'en Bo Roshem. When Hashem kills a person, it is a death penalty that has no external visible signs, right? Hashem kills a person, gives him a heart attack or something like that. There's no external visible marks on that. Af misa hamur bidei adam. So too, when there's a plain death sentence, minha based in kill somebody, so it's going to be misa she'en ba roshem. It's going to be with a death penalty that doesn't have any external marks. So therefore, that's going to exclude skila. Obviously, it's going to exclude saif. Obviously, those are externally visible. But the Gemara wants to know, ve'emos sreifa. So what about burning? Sreifa, we said, was completely internal. There were no external marks on the body, so therefore maybe that's the one. So therefore, Mida Amar Rachmana, Bas Kohen Besreifa. The answer is, well, remember that we had the punishment for a married woman, and we said it's not specified what the death penalty is. However, then we said, if she was a daughter of a Kohen, then she gets Sreifa. So that means that the standard death sentence is not Sreifa. That was the only other option we had of a non-external showing Misa, and it's not that one. So therefore, it must mean Mikal Deha Lav Basreifa. The default death sentence, which is being given to this woman who commits adultery, is not Sreifa, because that's only applicable to the daughter of a Kohen. Lav Basreifa. So we're on to Nun Gimel Amid Aleph. Bishlama Rabbi Yonasan Kidika Mefaresh Rabbi Tama. So I understand according to Rabbi Yonasan, right? That's what Rebbe's giving his explanation, right? He's got to explain that's not because it's the most lenient of misos, rather it's that there's no external visible marks, and right, we have that. Rabbi Yoshia, Mimai Deika Chenek Ba'olam Ema Saif. So, okay, so he says, well, but according to Rabbi Yoshia, so who says there is such a concept of chenek at all? Right? We don't need to have, there's such a concept of strangulation. There could be, I understand according to Rebbe, there has to be a second type of misa that has no visible external marks. But according to Rabbi Yoshia, he says it's going to be the least significant. So who says there is such a concept of chenek at all? Just say that whatever the least one is, and we know the Torah mentions the killing of by a sword. So maybe the most lenient one is killing by a sword. That's the one you give when none other is mentioned. So Marava, Arba Misos, Gemara, Gemiri Lahu. We have a tradition from Moshe, from Har Sinai, that there are four. That's how we know. So we know there's a fourth one. My lo mipnei shehi kala. So then, okay, so if that is the case, so then how are you going to explain why Rabbi Yonasan has to say it doesn't have to do with the fact that it is the most lenient? But seems like a perfectly reasonable explanation. We're always, if it's by default, you're going to pick the one that is most lenient. Why doesn't he like that answer? Because the Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanon, because of the argument between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbanon, whether chenek is in fact the most lenient one. According to the Rabbanon, chenek is the most lenient one, and therefore it makes sense that you would pick the most lenient one. But according to Rabbi Shimon holds that saif is the most lenient one, and that chenek is the second most. So then, therefore, the question would be, we need a better answer as to why we would pick chenek as the default, and the answer is because we're going to learn this comparison to Misa B'dei Shemaim that has no external marks. Amar le Rabbi Zera le'Abaye. So Rabbi Zera says to Abaye, Shar haniskolin delo ksiv behu skila. Right? There are some times that the punishment, the death sentence, the punishment in the Torah is skila, right? But it doesn't say that the punishment is skila. So how do we know that the punishment is skila? De gamri me'ov v'yidoni. Because we're going to have a gzera shava from the punishment of skila, which is written by the crimes of Ov and Yidoni. Ov and Yidoni were the ability to talk to the dead, which is a prohibition. You're not allowed to do that. And if you do that, there are two different ways to do it. We'll discuss how that works.
And the Jews use like Ouija boards or...
I guess the question is, we'll see whether those things are usser, right? Because we'll see what Ov and Yidoni is and whether it falls in, whether a Ouija board would fall into the category of Ov and Yidoni or something.
Man.
So, therefore, so the question we're going to ask is, B'mai Gemiri, which words in the pasuk are going to be the Gzera Shava? Which words is it? Because by Ov and Yidoni, we're going to see two different phrases, and depending on which phrase we use, it could tell us under which other crimes are going to get the same punishment. So first of all, there's b'mos yumasu gemiri. Is it that the pasuk has the phrase mos yumasu, that they're surely going to die? And so wherever you see the phrase mos yumasu, you know that it refers to skila. O bidmehem bum. Or is it the phrase that says their blood is upon them? That's a phrase that means skila. So which one is it? B'mos yumasu gemiri or bidmehem bum gemiri? So Amar le, so he answered back, demehem bam gemiri. It's from the phrase demehem bam. De'ibe mos yumasu, because if you were going to say that it was from the phrase of mos yumaso, gemiri de benehem lamali. So he says, then what do I need the phrase? What would that be extra for? What would be the point of that? Elamai b'demehem gemiri mos yumasu lamali. So he says, okay, yeah, but now that you're going to tell me that it's from the phrase demehem, that's going to be our gzera shava. So then mos yumasu seems extra. In other words, whichever way you're going to look at it, one of the phrases is superfluous. What is the point? So I will tell you, demehem is for skila, but mos yumasu is kedetanya, is like we learn in a brisa. Mos yumas hamakeh rotzeachu, right? He will surely die, the one who who does the hitting, because he is a murderer. So the murderer, it says this. Einli ela b'misa haksuva bo. So that means that the murderer is supposed to get the death penalty, which is written in that pasuk, which in this case is, as we said, was sayif, right? He's going to get his
Strangulation.
Sword, right? The murderer gets killed by the sword. Decapitation, right? Minayin she'im ata yochol lahamiso b'misa haksuva bo shata mamiso b'kol misa shata yochol lahamiso. What if the fellow is escaping or something occurs and you cannot kill him in that kind of a way? How do I know that we have permission, Basin has permission to execute him in whatever misa that you can, right? You can shoot him or something like that if he's escaping or something like that. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Mos yumas hamakeh, she shall surely die. So when you see Mos yumas, it tells us that gives based in permission to carry out an execution that is not according to execution of based in if for some reason based in is unable to carry out the regular execution.
Good point in the head, basically.
Correct. So they give an example like the fellow is escaping and he gets on a boat to run away. Can you sink the boat and thereby drown him? Or can you shoot an arrow, right? Because they didn't have guns back then. But can you shoot an arrow and kill him? And that is acceptable, right? So Amar le Rav Achami Difti le Ravina. Okay, so Rav Achi from Difti says to Ravina, Ibamos yumasu gemiri. So Micah Kashyole. So he says, if you're going to learn, from the Mos Yumasu, if that's going to be the if that's going to be the source, so then what is the question that Rabbi Zera was trying to ask? Right, Rabbi Zera was asking, which of the two do I use, Demehem Bam or Mos Yumasu? So if it's going to be from Mos Yumasu, so I don't understand what was bothering Reb Zera when he was asking the question. Others, Reb Zera seemed to come along and say, as we're going to say, the way that he asked the question was, is it Demehem Bam or is it Mos Yumasu? I hope it's Demehem Bam, because if it's Mos Yumasu, I've got a real problem. So what was the problem? What was his problem? So Elema, so we're going to say maybe his problem was this. This is maybe what was bothering him about the Xer. Now that we said the answer is Demehem Bam, he's happy. But what if it would have been Mos Yumasu? What was the problem that he had with that? Elema Ashes Ish Kakashale. So maybe the fact is that it says by Ashes Ish, by a married woman, it says Mos Yumasu. And we know that the punishment by an Ashes Ish is supposed to be, right, it says Mos Yumas Hano Eif Vehano Efes. Right, it says that the adulterer and the adulteress are supposed to die, and we know that that's supposed to be in chenek, right? They're supposed to get strangulation. So now, so ilem eishes ish kakashule lemese ulemigmar mos yumas me over yidoni. So then, we should be learning this gzera shava of mos yumas from Olav and Yidoni, and a regular eishes ish should be getting a death sentence not of chenek, where we said is the default one where no misa is written, but since in fact it says mos yumas, it should mean that the punishment is skila. Mala holod beskila afkan beskila. The punishment for regular adultery should be skila. Namina ka'amar rachmana arusa beskila. But the problem with that is going to be that in arusa, we said that the Torah goes out of its way to tell me that if the woman is an arusa, so then she gets skila. Mikal de Nesua lav beskila, which means that a married woman shouldn't get skila. So I've got a contradiction here. So therefore we know, but he says, but why should that be? So in other words, you've got a problem because you've got the pasuk says mos yumas, it should be beskila. That shouldn't bother him. From the fact that the arusa gets skila and the Nesua does not, it sort of counteracts the gezerah shava of mos yumas. and says that most you must, in that case, even though it says most you must, the Gzeira Shava doesn't apply, and we're going to give her chenek anyway. So that shouldn't bother him. Okay, so everything works out for there. However, Ve'ela, the problem that he had was make aviv v'imo. What about a person who hits his father or mother? That's going to be where his problem is. So he says, L'meisi u'lemigmar me'ov ve'yidoni. So what we should do is, it says over there also, most you must, that he's supposed to die. So therefore, right, and make aviv v'imo, again, the punishment is supposed to be chanek. So we should say, since it says most you must, the punishment should be skila. So now, let's kill him with skila, because we're going to learn the most you must from skila. So ad digamri me oviyidoni ligmaru me eshes ish. So he says, but wait a second. It says most you must by ov and yidoni, which we know is a punishment of skila. It says most you must by the adulteress, and there we know the punishment is chenek. So which Gzeira Shava are you going to learn? Are you going to learn it from ov and yidoni and give this make aviv v'imo, give him the punishment of skila, or are you going to learn it from eshes ish, from the noefes, from the adulteress, and give the make aviv v'imo the punishment of chenek? De'iatai ro rashai lemoshcha lehachmir aleh el lahakir aleh. So that shouldn't be a problem either, because if you've got a choice between which of the two death penalties you're going to give him the lenient one, right? So therefore, I've got a question: should I have a death penalty of skila, or should I have a death penalty of chenek? The answer is going to be chenek. So the halacha comes out fine again, no problem. So make ish ve'imo gets chenek, the noef and noefes, the adulteress gets chenek. It's not a problem. So Amar lei. So we answer, what was Rabbi Zera's problem? Wouldn't have been so difficult if we had used the Gzeira Shava of Mosu Masu. So Amar lei, so he answered it back. Shar haniskan gufaihu kakashale. The question was, now, if you've got this, the way that you've set this up is most you must mean skila, and most you must could mean chenek. You've set that up that way. So if that's the case, his question is, every other time in the Torah that the punishment of skila is supposed to be given, and all it says is most you must, how could you always give him skila? You've got, right, Kokashli, his question was like this, De'iba most you must, give me re. So the question is, if you're going to use the Gzeira Shava of most you must, this is what was bothering Rizera. Is it the Gzeira Shava of most you must? If we're going to learn a Gzeira Shava of most you must, ad digmir me over yidoni, why are you learning from ov and yidoni that the punishment is skila, ligmaru me ishes ish? You should learn most you must from the pasuk that has to do with the adulteress and give him chenek. And so therefore, it would be a difficult, problematic Gzeira Shava, because the Gzeira Shava really has two different places you could learn from. Why aren't we learning from the most lenient one? Therefore, when we answered him that the pasuk that you're learning from is Demei Hambam, he was satisfied, right? Demei Hambam is really the source, and Demei Hambam is not written by an adulterous woman, so we don't have a problem. Okay, that wasn't the complicated one. That was just the setup. Okay, next. Elu hein haniskolin. Now let's get into lists of averos that apply, that we give to each of the death sentences, right? So this is nice, because when you get to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and you do the al-chet that you get this misa, al-chet that you get this misa, al-chet. So at least now you have a list of the ones in the Torah that these are the crimes that a person may have committed, that in fact you get different death penalties for, right? Elu hein haniskolin. These are the punishments you get skila for. Haba al ha'em, somebody who has relations with his mother, val eshes ha'av, or his father's wife. They don't necessarily have to be the same person, but they can be, and we're going to discuss that. V'al ha'kala, a daughter-in-law. V'al ha'zachar, also on a male. V'al ha'behema, or an animal. V'ha'isha ha'mevias ha'behema, or a woman who has an animal have relations with her. V'ha'megadef, somebody who blasphemes the name of Hashem. V'ha'oved avodas kochavim, somebody who worships idolatry. V'ha'nosein mizaro lemolech, somebody who gives his offspring over to Molech. So Molech was some kind of, I don't know. Rashi points out that it can't be Avodah Zarah, because we already explained Avodah Zarah was one of the other Averos. There's a separate prohibition about giving your child over. They would pass their child through fire. It's an argument amongst commentaries of whether the child would die in the process and be burnt or not. But what they would do is they would pass this through. This was Chok Avodas Kochavim. This was a non-Jewish custom, and it is not Avodah Zarah, but the Torah says it's Chayav Skila if you do it. Ubal Ov V'Yidoni, somebody who worships Ov and who does the service of Ov and Yidoni, which is this talking to the dead. We're going to explain it in a Mishnah later on Samach Hey. V'Hamachal Es HaShabbos, somebody who violates Shabbos. V'Hamakal Aviv V'Imo, somebody who curses his father and mother. V'Haba Al Nara HaMa'orasa, somebody who has relations with a Nara Ma'orasa, as we've been discussing. V'Hamesis, somebody who convinces somebody else to do Avodah Zarah. V'Hamediach, somebody who convinces a whole city to do Avodah Zarah and makes them into a nir nidachas. V'hamechashef, somebody who does sorcery. Uben sorer umoreh, and a child who rebels against his mother and father, steals some meat and some wine. We'll discuss the details of the ben sorer umoreh later. Haba al ha'em. Now, if somebody has relations with his mother, chayav aleh mishum aim umishum eshes av, he has violated two prohibitions. Now, you can't kill somebody twice, but it is important because of the possibility that the avera was done b'shogeg, right? Somebody did not realize that this person was his mother/father's wife, or he didn't realize it was prohibited in some way. Okay, so now if he does that, so he's going to bring a korban chatos. So if he does this to a person, if he has with one person who is both his mother and his father's wife, so then he's going to bring two korbanos. He's violated two different averos, and he's going to bring two korbanos. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and it's going to be based on this interpretation of psukim. Eino chayav ela mishum ha'em bilvad. You're only chayav the avera of having relations with your mother, not the father's wife part. Habal Eishes Av, somebody who has relations with his father's wife, Chayav Mishum Eishes Av, has violated the prohibition against having relations with his father's wife, Umishum Eishes Ish, and also for adultery, right? Because they're married. Bein B'chai Ha'av, whether the father is alive, Bein La'achar Misas Aviv, or the father has died. Rash points out that does not mean that he gets the punishment for committing adultery if his father has died. It just means that the punishment for living with his father, your father's wife, once your father is married to a woman, you can never have relations with that woman, even after your father dies. Okay? That is, she's considered to always be your father's wife, and that can never be. Now, she's not Eishes Ish after that time. So only if the father is still married is it a double avera. Now, that applies bein min ha'erusin, bein min ha'nesuin. Marriage is midoraisa, as a Torah marriage from erusin and from nesuin, and so therefore this prohibition is going to be applying from the Torah's perspective, whether the erusin took place or nesuin took place. Haba al kalaso, if somebody has relations with his daughter-in-law, so chayav aleh mishum kalaso, so that he's violated multiple prohibitions. One, because she's his daughter-in-law, mishum eshes ish, and because she's married. So it's a double avera. Bein b'chaye beno, again, she's considered his daughter-in-law, whether his son is alive, bein la'achar misas beno, or his son has already died. Bein mina erusin, bein mina nesuin. It doesn't matter whether it's erusin or nesuin. They are not allowed to ever live together, and it's only a problem with eshes ish if the son is still alive. Says the Gemara. Tanya, we learn in our brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, this brisa disagrees with our Mishnah. Okay, this brisa is going to disagree. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im lo haisa ima reuya le'aviv. Let's say his mother wasn't somebody who the father was permitted to marry. Okay, so eino chayev el mishum ha'im bilvad. So then he's only going to be a violation of having relations with his mother under that circumstance, right? Our Mishnah, right, explains that that under all circumstances, even when the Rabbi Yehuda said that even when the woman is able to marry your father, you're only going to get violation of one avera anyway, right? This was Rabbi Yehuda's position, that the avera of your mother supersedes all of the other averos, and it doesn't matter whether the father is married or not, you're only going to have one avera. Here, in this brisa, Rabbi Yehuda's statement is that you would be violating both a prohibition of adultery and a prohibition of your mother, but not if she's not appropriate to marry him. Okay, so my ena re'uya lo. What does this brisa mean? It means that she's not appropriate to marry him. Ilema chayve krisos. So it could be straightforward. People who are prohibited by a kares prohibition, your sister, right? For example. So those are prohibitions. You cannot marry such a person.
Or someone with the same blood type.
Someone with the same blood type is not prohibited to you. Right, you can marry somebody who has like if you're O positive, you can marry somebody who's O positive, right? You can't marry somebody who is closely related to you, right? And we have the example of chayve krisos is chayve krisos, his sister, right, for example, or his aunt, and the one misos based in are one's examples like his mother or his mother-in-law or his daughter-in-law. Those are misos based in. So those are prohibitions that you cannot marry them. If you attempt to marry them, it doesn't count. Can't do anything with it. So that means that, so his claim is that since they cannot be married to you, that's why even if your father had relations with such a person and you are the result, so that woman is your mother, if you have relations with that mother, you're only violating the mother prohibition, not your father's wife, because they're not married. Now, the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says that is miklal de Rabbanan savri, afal gavdein ru'uya lo. That means that the Rabbanan would be disagreeing with him, would be saying that even though these marriages are not able to occur, you are still violating the prohibition of your father's wife. But how could that be? Ha leis le kedushin begava. That can't be. You can't have your father's wife with a woman that your father cannot be married to. Right? It's impossible. So if your father had an illegal relationship with one of those women, so she can be your mother, but she cannot be his wife. That's impossible. So there's no way that that's what it means. Ella, so rather what we must be discussing here is chayve lavin. We could have prohibitions, women who are prohibited for a person to marry based on a losase. The Torah says don't marry them. For example, a mamzeres, right? So she marries, your father marries a mamzeres, and then you are the resulting child of that mamzeres. The question is, if a person marries, he's not supposed to, the Torah says don't marry a mamzeres. If he does, in fact, marry a mamzeres, are they married and do they need a get? Right? Does it work anyway? So Rabbi Yehuda savar look Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Akiva, da amar ein kedushin tovsin b'chayve lavin. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Akiva says, and Rabbi Yehuda agrees with him, that if the Torah says that you're not allowed to marry, it's a lo saseh, kiddushin does not work. Even though it's not in the category of kares, it's not in the category of misa, it's simply a lo saseh, don't marry this person.
And if you do, they have to give
you do not need to give a get, right? If you do marry her anyway, there's no get necessary because it's not marriage, right? The marriage does not take effect. Okay, that's what Rabbi Akiva says. To which the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Akiva, and they say if it's only a lo saseh, you violated a prohibition, but the marriage is effective, and therefore a get is necessary. And so therefore, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says, that if your father has married somebody who is prohibited from a lo saseh, so then you're only violating one prohibition by living with your mother. But the Chachamim would disagree, and say, no, that marriage is effective, and you're living with your father's wife, and that's going to be a prohibition as well. Meisiv Rav Oshia. So Rav Oshia asks the following question: Iser mitzvah v'iser kedusha choltzos v'lo misyavmos. So we have a brisa that makes the statement that this is going to be a question on the fact that Rabbi Akiva agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. That's what we're calling into question. According to Rabbi Oshia, he says that if you have let's say you have a brother who dies. A man dies and he has no children, so the brother has to marry his wife as yibum. So what happens if the relationship between the brother and the wife is a prohibited marriage, either because of what we call mitzvah or because of kedusha? We're going to explain what those two things are. If the prohibition between the brother and the wife is actually an erva relationship, so then there's no yibum or chalitza at all. So for example, let's say a brother, his niece, which is a permissible marriage. Now he marries his niece. That means that when he dies, now this niece goes to his brother to marry. The problem is that's this man's own daughter. He can't marry her. In that circumstance, he can't marry her. There's no yibum, there's no chalitza. She is free to go with no yibum, no chalitza. Okay? Now, This is not that circumstance. This is the circumstance where the prohibition is either mitzvah or kedosha. Under those circumstances, yibum is permissible, but not acceptable. We're going to see not acceptable midrabanan. Therefore, the only thing that they can do is chalitza. Okay, choltos v'lo misyavmos. On to nun gimel amad beis. They do chalitza, but not yibum. So iser mitzvah. What is iser mitzvah? What is in that category? Shnios midivrei sofrim. These are women who are not direct relatives, but they are relatives of relatives, like a grandmother, who is not your mother, but it's your mother's mother. Therefore, midrabanan, she's aser.
Or your second cousin once removed.
That may be permissible altogether, right? So your cousin is permissible. Your first cousin is permissible. Remember, you can marry your first cousin, right? Marry your second cousin for sure. You can marry your second cousin. Mm-hmm. So this is those that are still close relationships enough that the Rabbanan prohibited them. Okay, so that is where we say that mida oraisa, there's a marriage that can take place. Therefore, yibum is required. But since there's a derabbanan prohibition, so we say that you must do chalitza, cannot do yibum. Ve'amai karu le isser mitzvah. So why does this brisa use the word mitzvah to describe these relationships? She mitzvah lishma divrei chachamim, because the mitzvah to listen to the chachamim, not get married. Okay, the next one was isser kedosha. So that is the isurim related to holiness, like an almana lekohen, like a widow to a kohen, or godol grusha lekohen godol, or a grusha v'chalutza lekohen hedjot. So an almana for a kohen godol, a widow cannot marry a kohen godol, and a divorced woman or somebody who's had chalitza cannot marry a kohen. So let's say this woman was divorced the first time. Now your brother marries her, and I guess he was a kohen also, so he wasn't supposed to, but now the other brother comes along, so he's usher to marry her from a perspective kedosha. The amai karulo hu kedusha karulo iser kedusha. Why do we call these people that the brother can't marry because of prohibition of kedosha? Dechsev, as the pasuk says, kedoshim yiyu leilohim, because by psukim, by the kohanim, it says the pasuk says they should be holy. So these are people who are as a matter of holiness cannot be married. V'tani Allah. And we learned about them. Rabbi Yehuda machlif. Rabbi Yehuda flips this, and he says machlif chalufehu. So machlif. So he's gonna flip this, and he's gonna say that kedoshim. Those are the ones that are the secondary relatives, and he learns that because that following the Darabanan makes you holy, and he has a pasuk that says that. And then mitzvah is that we have extra mitzvahs on kohanim, so the averos related to kohanim are the mitzvah. So he flips that. Now, what does that imply, though? That means that he implies that the marriage, yivamos, that the yibum could take place, only we say don't, and do chalitza instead. Now, according to what Rabbi Yehuda, we just said Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Akiva, and says these prohibitions, which are prohibited by a losase, like this kohen, the kedushin shouldn't work at all. So how is Rabbi Yehuda agreeing with this brisa just to flip the language when, in fact, it should be prohibited altogether? Marriages should not be effective at all, and there should be no yibum, no chalitza required at all. So the answer is chavlufehu demachlif ha chalitza boy. So he says. So this seems to imply that he says to flip it, but a chalitza is still necessary. Now, if Rabbi Yehuda is going to agree with Rabbi Akiva, these relationships which are prohibited by a losase, right, the relationship by the kohen gadol to an almana, for example, michti. Let's take a look. Chayve lavin Rabbi Akiva ki chayve krisas dami. According to Rabbi Akiva, a kohen tries to marry an almana, it wouldn't work, because it's a losase. And he holds that all losases, the kedushin, is not effective, just as if somebody wanted to give a ring and say, I'm married to my sister, it would be a meaningless gesture. So too, if a kohen gadol wants to marry an almana, it would be a meaningless gesture. So, v'chayve krisas la b'nei chalitza v'yibum ninhu. And therefore, a sister, right, let's say he was married in some kind of a way to, let's say, a brother. We could have such a circumstance where we had a half brother from the father's side, Chayv and Yibum, married to a half sister from the mother's side, who was permissible to each other because they don't have the same. Your brother doesn't have the same father or mother as your sister, but would be prohibited to you. And if you tried, there would be no Yibum Chalitza required in that case because you couldn't marry her, so there'd be no Yibum or Chalitza. So too, there should be no Yibum or Chalitza required for a kohen for an almana. for Kohen Gadol and Almana. So the answer is, L'dvar of the Tanakama Kamar. Rabbi Yehuda wasn't agreeing wholeheartedly with the Tanakama. He was saying, I don't think that there's chalitza or yibum necessary at all. He was just saying, but according to you, who does require chalitza, I just want to correct you on a point of order here. And that is that you've got the names backwards. Mitzvah and Kedosha, right? But he doesn't agree with the concept that a marriage of Lo Saseh would work in the first place. Therefore, he doesn't even require chalitza. But he says, according to the Tanakama, according to Rabbi who says that you do need chalitza, you should just know, Rabbi Yoshi, that you've got the names backwards, right? I just want to flip that. That was his point. I just want to flip the names, but that isn't gonna change my own shita that I agree with Rabbi Akiva. Okay, fine. Now, Ki Asar of Yitzchak, when Rabbi Yitzchak came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, Tani Kidetnan. So he went back and he taught a brisa like our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah holds that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't care. He says that even if the woman was married to your father and is your mother, you're still going to only violate one prohibition. That's what our Mishnah says. Right? Which he says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Chayev Elo Mishum Ha'em Bilvad. If you have this relationship with a woman who is both your father's wife and your mother, you are violating one prohibition because she's your mother. But time mai. So now we've got to go into these psukim and figure out why he says that. Why is it only one prohibition? So Amar Abaye. So Abaye tries first. To Amar Kra. Okay, so we don't have a chumash in front of us, but if you've got the psukim on the side, the Torah or Hashalim, just there are two psukim that are important here. Well, there's going to be three psukim. There's two psukim.
Has it here in Leviticus.
Right. So good. So let's read the two psukim. We've got Vayikra Yud Ches Zayin and Vayikra Yud Ches Ches. Right? These are our two psukim in a row. First pasuk: Ervas avicha ve'ervas imcha lo segale. You shall not reveal the nakedness of your father or the nakedness of your mother. Imcha she is your mother. Lo segale ervasa, do not reveal her nakedness. That's the first pasuk. A lot of extra words in there. So we see that there's going to be some drushos here. Then the next pasuk continues, Ervas Eishas Avicha, the erva, the nakedness of your father's wife, Lo segale, you shall not reveal. Ervas Avicha he, because that is the nakedness of your father. Okay, those are our two psukim. So now, Abaye looks at the psukim and he says like this, Damar Kra, the pasuk says, Imcha he, right? In that pasuk of Yud Ches Zayin, right? It says, she is your mother. Mishum imo atamachayva. So this pasuk says that somebody, first of all, ervas avicha, the nakedness of your father, meaning that if you have relations with your father himself, that's what we interpret in pasuk, relations with your father himself, you violated a special prohibition, aside from the prohibition of homosexual relationships from your father. Besides, that's an avera. Then we have ervas imcha, your mother. Then we have imcha hi. Then it says imcha hi, she is your mother. So that comes to tell me, because mishum imo atamachayvo, you're only going to be violating such a case because she is your mother. It's a miut, we are saying, right? The pasuk is saying your mother twice. Why? To say that if you have relations with somebody who's your mother and your father's wife, via tamachayvo mishum eishes of, it's not going to be your father's wife that is going to be the punishment. It's only because she's your mother. Okay, elameata. But the problem with your explanation, Abaye, is the way that you're learning it. If you go to the next pasuk, and the next pasuk says that talks about your father's wife. The next pasuk says your father's wife, and again, it doubles the language. It starts off back in the pasuk. It says ervas eishas avicha lo segale. You cannot have relations with your father's wife. Why? Ervas avicha he. That is the nakedness of your father. So now that pasuk ervas eishas avicha lo segale, ervas avicha he mishum eishas ava tamechayvo. You have to interpret it the same way. The double language is going to say that if you have relations with a woman who is your father's wife, and therefore also somebody who's a married woman, so you're going to only be chayev for the father's wife, not for adultery. And so, I'm sorry, not adultery, but because she might be your mother. So if she's married, if your mother is married to your father, and you have relations, so now you're going to say that this pasuk tells me that you're not going to receive a punishment based on the fact that she is your mother, only because she is your father's wife. So mishum eishes ava tamachayvo via tamachayvo mishum imo. So now here's our problem. Okay, now if what you've just said is true, I've got two psukim. One pasuk is going to tell me that if I've got a woman then and I have a relation with my mother who married my father. One pasuk is going to tell me it's because she's my mother, then chayiv. Then the next pasuk says it's because she's my father's wife, then I'm going to be obligated. Okay, so now, if that's the case, Ella imo shehi eshes aviv. So let's say you've got a woman who is both things, both my mother and my father's wife. So kai hacha umemayit la, kai hacha umemayit la. Now go to both psukim. The first pasuk tells me, since she's my father's wife and my mother, I'm not chayav because she's my father's wife, only because she's my mother. Then I go to the next pasuk and say, well, she's my father's wife and my mother, but I'm only chayav because she's my father's wife, not because my mother. That means the first pasuk is telling me I'm not chayav because she's my father's wife. The second pasuk is telling me I'm not chayav because she's my mother. So therefore, what would come out is, Hashta imo she'ina ishes aviv. If I had a woman who was my mother, not my father's wife, so mechayev ishes mechayev, then I'd be liable. That would be the first pasuk, right? Because she's my mother, but not my father's wife. Ishes aviv she'ina imo. Let's say the second pasuk would be telling me, if she was my father's wife, who is not my mother, mechayev, I'd be chayev also. But imo shehi ishes aviv, but a mother who is my father's wife, lo mechayev klal. Then both psukim are gonna cancel it out. One pasuk is gonna say you're not chayav because she's your father's wife. The next pasuk is gonna say you're not chayav because she's your mother. So therefore, she's not. It would come out illogical. It would come out that you're not chayav at all. The two, and furthermore, l'Rabbanan nami haksiv. Even according to the Rabbanan, it says imchahi. The pasuk also says your mother. So therefore, if Rabbi Yehuda has no special way of interpreting this pasuk, then what are the Rabbanan going to do with this phrase imchahi? Now the Rabbanan also have this pasuk of imchahi, and they say that you're chayav double, you're chayav twice. Once because it's your father's wife, and once because your mother. So therefore, the answer is Ella hahumi boy likid Rav Shisha b'reid Rav Idi. So rather, we're going to answer that they are going to use this pasuk according to the opinion of what Rav Shishi bar Rav Idi says, which we're going to learn on the next page, what Rav Shishi bar Rav Idi says. And Rabbi Yehuda nami ahumi boyle kid Rav Shisha b'reid Rav Idi. Rav Yehuda is also going to use it according to that pasuk of Rav Shishi b'reid Rav Idi. This pasuk of imchahi, right? It's not going to come to reduce and say it's only your mother, not Ashes. We're going to use it for a different purpose, but we're going to hold on what that purpose is until next page. Okay, so now, Ela Amar Rav Acha Brei de Rav Ika. So rather, Rav Acha. So now we've got these two psukim. We need a good method of interpreting all of these psukim so that it comes out that according to Rav Yehuda, we're only going to have one prohibition. According to the Chachamim, we're going to have two prohibitions. So now, next person to give it a shot is Rav Ika. So Amar Rav Acha Brei de Rav Ika. I'm sorry, Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Ervasa. Right, this is the pasuk Zion. This is the second pasuk again. Right, Ervas Avicha, it says she's the Erva. She's the wife of your father, and she's your mother. And Ervasa, her Erva, you shall not reveal. So now, Mishum Erva Achas Atamechayvo v'Yetamechayvo Mishum Shtei Arvos. So he says that what comes out there is that the pasuk tells you that the same woman can be your father's wife and your mother, and then the pasuk says, her, in the singular form, you shall not reveal. Which means the pasuk is telling us that despite the fact that the same person can have two averos, she is still considered erva singular, one, and therefore you cannot give a person two punishments for having relations with the same individual one person. That's how Rav Acha Breder of Ika tries to learn it. Problem is, Elameata, if that is the case, every time we have the singular word erva in a pasuk where we have two separate prohibitions and it's talking about the same person, it should come out that the ruling should be consistent. It should always be that you cannot get two punishments for having single relations with one person. However, ervas kalascha lo sega. Let's take a look at the prohibition in the Torah about daughter-in-laws. By the prohibition about daughter-in-laws, which is in the same parak but a few psukim later, ervas kalascha lo segale. You shall not reveal the erva of your daughter-in-law. Eshes bincha hi, she is the wife of your son. Lo segale ervasa, and it follows the same structure. You shall not reveal her erva singular. So hachinami. So therefore, I should say there's two prohibitions in this pasuk. One, she's my daughter-in-law. Number two, she's my son's wife. But the Torah comes back and calls her erva singular, so therefore I should come out, according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, it should come out that there's only one avera. Okay, that's how it should come out. So hachanami mishum erva achas etam mechayvo v'yetam mechayvo mishum shtei arayos. Ervos, you should only be chayav once, not twice. Vehatnan, but that's not how it comes out. We learn in a Mishnah, habal kalaso, somebody has relations with his daughter-in-law, chayav ale mishum kalaso, mishum eshes ish. So he's going to be violating his daughter, that is the prohibition of a daughter-in-law, and because she's married. That's what our Mishnah says. Bein b'chayi beno, bein la'achar misas beno, it doesn't matter whether the son is alive or not, right? It's still going to be a violation of son-in-law. Now, there, velo polig Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah does not argue with that statement. So that means that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a woman who is married to our son is a double prohibition. It's two prohibitions, even though it says the word erev asah. So therefore, erev asah cannot be our source for limiting it to one prohibition. Ella keva dechad gufahu af agav detrei isurei ninhu ksiv erev asah. So it's the same thing. There's one person here. It has two prohibitions. It uses the word erev asah. It should be the same rule, right? It should be two prohibitions, but it says erev asah. It should only be one. So therefore, that isn't the case. Rabbi Yehuda does not use the word erev asah to limit us to a single prohibition for two averos on the same person. Ella amar Rava. Now we're going to get into our chart. Rava rather says, here's how it all works out. Kasavar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that we're going to start with ervas avicha. So he says this is by ervas avicha is the first is in Yudches pasuk vav. Ervas avicha. Okay, so he says zu eshes avicha. He says this is not talking about your father himself. This is talking about your father's wife. Right, your father's nakedness could literally mean your father having relation with your father. Right? He says that's not how Rabbi Yehuda learns it. He says Rabbi Yehuda talks about Eisha's ervas avicha means your father's wife, right? Okay? And your father's wife could even include your mother, right? Because your father's wife is anybody. Could be your mother also. Umaisi law bigzera shava, right? Why does he do that? As we're going to see later on, that he's going to learn it with a gzera shava. Why? Because when it comes to the psukim, in the Torah, the rule is like this. I need to list a prohibition. We call that azhara. That's the warning where the Torah says something is prohibited. Then later on, the Torah will tell me what the punishment is, right? Sometimes the Torah won't tell me what a punishment is. We have default punishments. Like, for example, if the Torah tells me it's misas beistin, it doesn't tell me which one. We know it's chenek. If the Torah tells me a lo saseh, but it doesn't tell me what punishment, we know that you get malchus, okay? But generally speaking, we need to have two things. We need to have an azhara, a warning in the Torah, and then we need to tell me the punishment. Later on, when the Torah tells me the punishment, for which we said is skila, of living with my father's wife or my mother, right? It uses the phrase that it is ervas avicha hi, right? She's your erva. And we're going to see that pasuk is talking about not your father, but your father's wife. That pasuk is clearly talking about a father's wife. Therefore, when it talks ervas avicha, whenever he says it's a gzera shava, whenever the Torah is talking about ervas avicha, it means his wife. It doesn't mean himself. Okay, so ervas is no special prohibition for having homosexual relations with your father, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, as we'll see, right? It's ervas avicha, which means his father's wife. Okay,
why do they use such specific language, like your father's wife? Like, isn't that obvious?
What's obvious about it?
No, it's saying your father's wife, like as opposed to whose other. Like it's not necessarily your mother, but it's in context of your mother.
Not always.
But not always, right?
Yeah.
It's if your father gets remarried and then gets divorced, you can't marry her.
If you were here earlier, you would have understood.
Right? Sharp. All right.
Yeah.
It's too early in the morning. Okay, so now so it's fine. So he's gonna. So therefore, now mashma bein eshes aviv shehi imo, bein eshes aviv she'ena imo. This phrase, this is all we've got so far. He's going to go one by one. Ervas avicha means who's prohibited, right? We don't have any prohibitions up until that. This is who's prohibited. Both your father's wife who could be your mother, couldn't also not be your mother. Doesn't matter, but your father's wife. Okay, so it's both Eishes Aviv she'ena imo and imo now. Mash bein Eishes Aviv she'imo bein Eishes Aviv she'ena imo. Now, imo she'ena Eishes Aviv minayin. So therefore, I now know prohibited to me is somebody who's my father's wife and somebody's my father's wife and my mother. How do I know? Let's say there's somebody who's my mother, but not my father's wife. Where's that prohibition, right? So for example, my mother and father got divorced. She's no longer married to my father. How do I know that that woman is also prohibited to me? Talmud Lomar, ervas imcha, right? Therefore the pasuk says, ervas imcha, that's this pasuk. Ervas imcha lo segala. So ervas imcha lo segala. That's imcha he mishum imo atamechayvo v'atamechayvo mishum eishes of. So sorry, that was I move into the next phrase. So this is lo segala versa. That's his mother who is not his father's wife. Okay, that means they could have never gotten married, right? His mother, who's not married to him. This otherwise we said that if he was married and then got divorced, still under the prohibition of his father's wife, we said that was going to be forever. So we've got these two: his father's wife, even if it's his mother, and of his mother, even if it's not his father's wife. So the question is, imchahi. The last phrase in the pasuk is third phrase. Imchahi. She is your mother. So what is that pasuk for? That's extra. There's no cases left. The answer is, if I've got no cases left, this is a mute. This is a limiter. This is to tell me something that I thought was prohibited before is less prohibited than I thought. So therefore it comes to tell me, Mishum imo ata mechayvo ve'iyata mechayvo mishum eishes aviv. That's coming to tell me that if this woman is my mother, who is also from my father's wife, then I'm only going to be violating the avera of my mother, not because of Eishes Av. That's how Rabbi Yehuda learns. There's only one prohibition. If a person has relations with a mother who's also married to his father, it's only one prohibition. It's the fact that his mother, from this extra words, imcha hi. That's how Rabbi Yehuda learns these three sections.
Chart is very handy.
Right? Very good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Tanya, Kavase de Rava. Now we have a brisa that's going to support this interpretation that Rava gives. Okay, so Rava's correct, seems right, and we have a brisa that supports it as well. So Ish, he's going to start with all of these prohibitions about having illegal relationships. First, it says Ish. The pasuk says Visha Sher Yishka Vimishas Erva Eishes Aviv. The pasuk starts off in. We're going to start with pasuk Perak Chaf pasuk Yud Aleph. Perak Chaf pasuk Yud Aleph is this end pasuk. It says 1, but it's really 2011. Right, Chaf pasuk Yud Aleph is where we find the punishment. Okay, so we're going to start over there by the punishment. By the punish, it says the whole pasuk is V'isha sher yishkav es eishes aviv, a man who has relations with his father's wife. Ervas aviv gila, he has revealed the erva of his father. Mos yumasu, then he shall surely die. Shnehem, both of them. Demehem bam, and also we had learned most demehem bam means we already know. Demehem bam means skila. That's where we see it comes out. Right, exactly as we said. Demehem bam means skila. Now, ish, when it says in that pasuk that it applies to an ish, a man, prat l'katan. That means that if the person who's doing the avera is a katan, so it doesn't count. Asher yishkav es eishes aviv, who has relations with his father's wife, mashma bein eishes aviv she'imo bein eishes aviv shelo imo. That pasuk means to tell me that this punishment of skila applies whether the mother is married to the father or not. Imo she'ena eishes aviv minayin. What about how do I know that if it's his mother who's not married to his father? Where do I know that? Talmud Lomar. Therefore, the pasuk says ervas aviv gila. So the pasuk continues along, and it says he has revealed the erva of his father. So that's mufne. So that's extra. Lehakish v'ladon mimenu gzera shava. So that's going to be extra in order to learn from it a gzera shava, which I'm going to connect back to the original prohibition, which we're going to see in a moment. So mos yumasu, and then the pasuk says mos yumasu means that you should get skila. Now, atomer beskila o enil el ba'achas mikol misas mus b'Torah. So you say it says that she should surely die. Maybe that means one of the other misos in the Torah, as we had discussed. Maybe it means chanek. Could mean other things. Nemar kan demehem bum, v'nemar ba'ov v'yidoni demehem bum. So we use our gzeir shava. Gzeir shava says demehem bum, which is a connection to ov and yidoni. Malahola beskila, just like by ov and yidoni they get skila. Afkan beskila, so too there's going to be skila. Okay, so now this is what we said. The isha sher yishkav is ishes ish. That means that his father's wife, even if it's also his mother, the punishment is skila. And then ervas aviv gila was extra for the gzeir shava to link back to over here, which we're going to see in a moment. Okay, that ervas aviv is going to connect us back to here. That, just to give the preview, is as we already stated. We didn't know whether ervas aviv, ervas avicha in this pasuk meant the father himself or the father's wife. Therefore, from the fact that this pasuk is extra here, and it's telling us that this is talking about his father's wife, even if she's also his mother, is talking about this ervas aviv, is also talking about his father's wife over here, which gets us started in Rabbi Yehuda's drasha over here. Once we get started with the understanding that this pasuk is talking about his father's wife, we now know that this is talking about his mother who's not his father's wife, and then here's our limiter. Okay? So that's where we're going to go. So, Onesh Shamanu. So we've got these psukim sorted out about the punishment. Azhara minayin. What is the source for the prohibition in the first place? Tamid Lomar. So we're going to learn ervas avicha lo sigaleh. This pasuk here. Ervas avicha, the erva of your father, you should not reveal. Ervas avicha. The ervas avicha means zu eshes avicha. It's your father's wife. Ata omer eshes avicha. You say it means your father's wife. O ena ella ervas avicha mamish, or maybe it means his father himself. Nemar kan ervas avicha lo segaleh. The answer is this is our gzeira shava. It says over here ervas avicha you shall not reveal. V'nemar lehalon, and then it said over here ervas avicha gila, he has revealed his father's erva. Ma lehalon beishus hakasav medaber, just like over here. It's talking only about, this pasuk is only talking about marriage. The pasuk said, Ve'isha sher yishkav es eshes aviv. This pasuk is talking about a wife the whole time. Then it tells us this gzeira shava. So that means afkan be'ishus hakasav medaber. Therefore, this pasuk ervas avicha is not talking about the father himself. It's talking about the father's wife. That's how we know that. Mashma bein eshes aviv. So now, if it's talking about his father's, if this pasuk is talking about his father's wife, that means it's his father's wife. Bein eshes aviv shehi imo, bein eshes aviv she'ena imo. It does not matter whether the father's wife is his mother also or not. Okay. Then the pasuk says ervas imcha, right? Imo. So therefore, it says his mother in the next part of the pasuk. Imo she'ena eshes aviv. Minayin. So how do I know? So okay, his mother. So he says, I said it wrong. Eshes aviv she'imo bein eshes aviv she'ena imo. So now imo she'ena eshes aviv minayin. How do I know that it's also prohibited for your mother, which is not your father's wife? Talmud lomar. Therefore, the pasuk says ervas imcha lo segaleh. This pasuk ervas imcha lo segaleh. That's the mother who is not his father's wife. Finally, elabaz hara she'asa kasav imo she'ena eshes aviv ki imo shehi eshes aviv. Onesh minayin. So where's the punishment? Namar kan ervas avicha lo segaleh, v'nemar loholan ervas aviv gila. So therefore, now how do we know that these two? This is going to go refer back to this pasuk. So again, mab azhara asa kasav imo she'ina eshes aviv ki imo she eshes aviv. Just like when it comes to the punishment, we said the father's wife, if she is his mother or not his mother. So we're going to say it's the same thing. And here we're going to say also his mother, who's not his father's wife, is just as prohibited. So now we're going to use the gzeira shava back the other way. And we're going to say, this one talks about his father's wife, even if she's his mother or not a mother. Then this talks about a mother, even if she's wife or not. So we're going to combine, we're going to say that those two get the same prohibition. So too, they get the same punishments, right? So therefore, af ba'onesh asa kasev imo she'ena eshes aviv ki imo she'eshes aviv. So too with punishment, his mother, who is not married to his father, gets the same punishment of skila. Okay? Now, all of that is great using these two psukim and these two psukim. I've got the mother who's my father, the father is my mother. Okay, now, imchahi comes the last pasuk. What do I use this for? Imchahi mishum imo atamechayvo v'yatamechayvo mishum eshes av. The answer is, that's how Rabbi Yehuda comes to the conclusion. It means you only get one prohibition, not two. If the woman is both prohibited because she's your father's wife and prohibited because she's your mother, don't say, hey, it's two different psukim, you get two different punishments. We're only going to give one punishment. Imchahi. That's how Rabbi Yehuda learns it, and that's simple enough, right? That's how Rabbi Yehuda learns it. V'Rabbanan. Now the Rabbanan have all of these psukim too. What do the Rabbanan do with these psukim? Okay, so the Rabbanan are going to say, Ervas avicha mamish. The Rabbanan are going to start off with this column. Ervas avicha means literally his father. Separate punishment if you have relations with your father. Haimi ve'es zochar nafka. So 1 second, we know that it's prohibited to have any homosexual relations. Doesn't make any difference. Do you want to stop here? We'll take a couple minute break. Let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, we are continuing. We're going to just review quickly the fact that we were going through the Rabbanan's viewpoint on these psukim. And we said like this. The first part is, V'Rabbanan says, Ervas avicha means mamish, his father, okay? So, Haimiv es zachar nafka, but 1 second, we already know that there's a prohibition about having any homosexual relations from the pasuk ves zachar. So, therefore, l'chayev alav shtayim. The answer is that if he has relations homosexual with his father, he's violating 2 prohibitions. Ukid Rav Yehuda, like Rav Yehuda says. Dam Rav Yehuda says, Nachri haba'al aviv. Nachri means a non-Jew. A non-Jew who has relations with his father, chayev shtayim, he's violating 2 prohibitions. Hacha al achi aviv chayev shtayim. Haba al achi aviv chayev shtayim. Somebody has relations with his father's brother, his uncle, is also violating 2 prohibitions. So Amar Rava, so Rava says, Mistabra milsa de Rav Yehuda bi Yisrael. Makes sense that when Rav Yehuda used the word nachri, non-Jew, he meant Jew. He meant Jew, bishogeg, and he was talking about a circumstance where it was done bishogeg ubekorban. And therefore, we're arguing, the question we're asking that Rabbi Yehuda is addressing is, how many prohibitions have you violated? If you did it bishogeg, how many korbanos would you bring? Right? V'hayde kamer nachri, so why do you use the word non-Jew? Is lishna ma'al Yehu. He was just using a euphemism, because chas v'shalom, we didn't want to imply that a Jew would do such a thing. So, but he meant a Jewish person. How many averos would he have done? Because if you were really talking about a non-Jew, so mamish, so dino mai, so what would be the halacha there? Nihu, what would be the halacha there? Katala, he'd be killed, right? That would be the punishment for a non-Jew who commits this act. And it does not matter for a non-Jew whether it's done shogeg or mazid. The only difference, but mazid by a Jew, he gets the death penalty. B'shogeg, he brings a korban, but a non-Jew doesn't bring a korban for an avera b'shogeg. He also gets misa for an avera b'shogeg. So therefore, since there's no circumstance where a non-Jew brings a korban for this, betray katli katal play, how are you going to kill the non-Jew twice? Doesn't make sense, right? To have double misa. So therefore, it's talking about a Jew, and we're talking about korbanos. Tanya nami hachi. We also have a brisa that supports that view. Haba'al aviv, if somebody has relation with his father, is chayiv shtayim, so he's violating 2 prohibitions. Haba'al achi aviv, somebody has relations with his father's brother, is chayiv shtayim, is violating 2 prohibitions. Again, because uncle is also prohibited. Now, ikad amri delo Rabbi Yehuda. So there are some say that this doesn't follow Rabbi Yehuda. Ikad amri afilu temer Rabbi Yehuda. That what the question is, would Rabbi Yehuda agree with this or not? Is there 2 prohibitions, right? Remember, Rabbi Yehuda is going to tell you that this pasuk, Ervas Avicha, doesn't refer to his father. So therefore, does Rabbi Yehuda have 2 prohibitions when it comes to having relations with one's father? Right? I understand homosexual relations in general, that's 1. But he doesn't have this one, Ervas Avicha, because that applies to his father's wife, not to his father. So the answer is, some people say Rabbi Yehuda agrees with it that it's 2, because umaisi lo bekal v'chomer me achi aviv. There is another pasuk that says it's prohibited to have relations with one's father's brother. And he's going to say, Kal v'chomer, if it's prohibited to have relations with the father's brother, and you get 2 averos for that, father is a closer relationship, and therefore for sure he's going to get punished doubly for a father. Ma'achi aviv de kurva aviv de avivhu, since the father's brother is only related to you because of the father, chayiv shtayim, you're going to be violating 2 prohibitions. Aviv lo kol shekain, so then your father for sure is under the same circumstances. The kamiflagi beplugta dabai v'rava. Now, the question about whether he's going to then have 2 prohibitions is going to depend on a separate argument between Abai and Rava. And the argument goes like this. Mar savar onshin min adin, mar savar ein onshin min adin. The question is, can you create a prohibition in the Torah based on a logical deduction? Meaning, if the Torah tells you that a uncle is a prohibition, can you automatically presume that a father is also a prohibition? According to according to Abaye, sure you can. According to Rava, no, you can't. right? The Torah tells you what's prohibited. You cannot make any logical deductions about what's prohibited. So according to Abaye, Rabbi Yehuda has a kal v'chomer. You're right, this pasuk isn't going to tell me it. But the pasuk that talks about my uncle is going to also tell me that. And therefore, I'm going to still have two prohibitions according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rava, he says I can't use a kal v'chomer, so therefore there's no extra prohibition. Even though my uncle might be two prohibitions, my father is only one prohibition. Okay, so now, v'rabanan ashara le'eshes aviv minalahu. So now back into the issue where if the father, if this pasuk ervas avicha is talking about his father, where is the prohibition against your father's wife? So nafkalhu me ervas eshes avicha lo segaleh. Ervas avicha eshes avicha lo segaleh is in this pasuk, the second pasuk, Zion, right? That's talking about his father's wife. We haven't talked about what Rabbi Yehuda does with this pasuk, so hang on to that. But according to this is talking about his father's wife, even if she's his mother, which Rabbi Yehuda learned from there. So that's where the Rabbanan get that. For Rabbi Yehuda, what does Rabbi Yehuda do with that pasuk? We never talked about that pasuk with Rabbi Yehuda. Hahu mibayile lashara le'eshes aviv la'achar misa. This is telling us that your father's wife is prohibited even after your father dies. Meaning it's not just an issue that it's your father's wife that makes her prohibited while they're still married. It's also a prohibition well after your father dies. So that's what he's going to say. Your father's wife is prohibited even after your father's death. Now, for Rabbanan, where did the Rabbanan get that from? Right? Where did the Rabbanan get that prohibition from? Hahumi seifa dekra nafka. That's from the end of the pasuk. The end of the pasuk over here. Ervas avicha hi. That's the father's wife who is prohibited even after death. Okay, that's where Rabbanan learned that from. Now for Rabbi Yehuda, what does Rabbi Yehuda do with that pasuk? We didn't talk about that pasuk according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda uses hahu mibayile mishum eishes of atamechayvo v'atamechayvo mishum eishes ish. The answer is because that pasuk is telling us that if a person has relations with his father's wife, remember she's married, so that should be a prohibition of adultery also. The Torah is telling us it's only one prohibition. It's the prohibition of his father's wife, not a prohibition of adultery. That's where that's talking about. So therefore, that's for sitting with his father's wife. He is chayiv, but he is not also chayiv for eishes ish. That's what he holds down there. Okay, the onan tnan. And we learned in a Mishnah, Habal Eshes Av, somebody has relations with his father's wife, Chayav Aleha Mishum Eshes Av, you're going to violate the prohibition against his father's wife, Umishum Eshes Ish, and because of adultery, Bein Bechaya Av, Bein Lachar Misas Aviv, whether it's during the father's lifetime or not the father's lifetime. Now that's fine, that's the Rabbanan's opinion. The Rabbanan say, throw on all these Isurim, father's wife, adultery, and it doesn't matter if they're dead or right, because going down this list, they don't have the limiter. So therefore, but the problem is, the low poly Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't jump into that Mishnah and say, I don't agree with you. It's only one prohibition. Why not? So Amar Abaye says, polig bibraisa. You're right. They don't quote Rabbi Yehuda as arguing in the Mishnah, but Rabbi Yehuda does argue with it. And we have a brisa that indicates that Rabbi Yehuda does argue that point. So don't worry about the fact that the Mishnah doesn't quote it. It's okay. Rabbi Yehuda does hold that way. So we are authentic. Now we've got every pasuk accounted for according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the Rabbanan, onish to eshes aviv le'achar misa mina lehu. The Rabbanan, how do we know that after the father's death, where is that prohibition? Where's the punishment for that? Bishlam Rabbi Yehuda. I don't ask that question according to Rabbi Yehuda. Maisi la b'gzera shava. Rabbi Yehuda already had this gzera shava. So therefore, any prohibition that's in this column, we already know applies back and forth because the gzera shava allows us to transport a prohibition after the father's death through this gzera shava back to the punishment of skila. So that's great because he's got the gzera shava. But the Rabbanan don't have this gzera shava because the Rabbanan learn that this ervas avicha is for a different purpose. So Ella Rabbanan minalahu. So where is the Rabbanan telling us that the punishment for having relations with one's father's wife after his father dies, where's the punishment that's skila? So Amar Lacha, he'll say to you, Hahu ervas aviv gila. So he says that is from this pasuk of ervas aviv gila. Remember this pasuk that Rabbi Yehuda used as a gzera shava? So they don't use it for gzera shava. So therefore, since they're not using his gzera shava, that is the punishment for sitting with his father's wife even after his death. I don't know if the tissue box is in the way for the camera, but
That's where the Rabbanan learned. Demapik lo Rabbi Yehuda l'gzer shava. Rabbi Yehuda, he used this for gzer shava, but that's convenient because mafki le'inu le'onish te'eshes aviv lachar misa. They don't need the gzer shava. So therefore, that is telling us this punishment of his punished for sinning his wife after his father's death, right? Where again, Rabbi Yehuda says, here's the prohibition. The punishment comes from the gzer shava. According to the Rabbanan, they agree this is the prohibition, right? But here's the punishment. The Rabbanan onish le'imo she'ina eishes aviv min allahu. So now the Rabbanan, where do they have the punishment for a mother who is not the father's wife? Amar of Shisha, Braid Rav Idi, Amar Kra, Imchahi. They say that's what this pasuk of Imchahi is for. He says, Asa hakasav le'imo she'ina eishes aviv kimu she'hu eishes aviv. This pasuk is telling us, according to the Rabbanan, that his mother, who is not his father's wife, is the same as his mother who is his father's wife. Just like the mother who is his father's wife you get skila for, so to the mother that is not the father's wife is also punishable by skila. And that's how the Rabbanan learn all of this. Good?
Yeah. You got it. Done with that.
Okay. Now. Okay, next. Haba al kalaso, somebody has relations with his daughter-in-law. So now, v'lichayev nami mishum eshes beno. So why is it the pasuk? We said get two prohibitions. We said you're going to get two prohibitions. What are the two prohibitions? Daughter-in-law and she's married, adultery. What about a third prohibition? The fact is that the pasuk says you cannot have relations with your daughter-in-law because she is the daughter of your son, and she's also married. That should be three prohibitions. So Abaye explains pasuk hakasav bekalaso the same be'eshes beno. The pasuk starts off calling this woman your son-in-law, your daughter-in-law, and then says it's your son's wife. Lo marcha zuhi kalaso zuhi eshes beno. The Torah is just giving you a definition. What makes somebody your daughter-in-law? The fact that she is married to your son. It's not telling us it's two different prohibitions. It's not two different prohibitions. It's just definition. So therefore, it's still one prohibition. So daughter-in-law, who is your son's wife, is one. She's married to your son. That's adultery. That's two. Next Mishnah. Habal hazachar, somebody who has relations with a male. So v'ala behema, or relations with an animal. V'ha'isha hamevias behema, or a woman who causes an animal to have relations with her. Beskila, the punishment is skila for all of those. Im adam chote behema machata. So the question is, though, the animal also gets killed. So the question is, if a person does an avera, what did the animal do? Why does the animal get killed? The animal's innocent. So Ella lefisha ba le'adam takala al yada. The answer is because a catastrophe happened to a human being because of this animal. Lefichach, therefore, Amar Akasav, the pasuk says tisakel. Because we say that the animal should be killed because of that. Davar acher, another explanation, shalot tehem behema overes bashuk, so that the animal won't be walking down the street. V'yomru, and people will say, Zuhi sheniskal ploni al yoda. That's the animal that so and so got killed for having relations with, and people will say negative things about the guy, right? So better the animal be gone. Okay, says the Gemara. Okay.
New charts.
New charts. That's why we got the magnet. Okay, good. New charts. Okay.
Zachar minolon. Where do I know that this is prohibited? Mishkav Zachar is prohibited. Tana Rabbanan and Rabbi learned. This is from the pasuk V'isha sher yishkav es Zachar, person who has relations with a man. Mishkivei isha, like one lies with the woman, and it says mishkivei. We're going to point out it says mishkivei. Two types of bia, two types of relations, right? One is normal relations, one is sodomy. So toeva asu shnehem, they have done a disgraceful act. Most yumasu, they will die. Demehem bam, their blood is on them. And we said Demehem bam means skila, so we know that we're talking about a avera of skila for these relations. So it says ish, it says a man. Prat l'katan, that excludes a child. Child does the avera, is not get skila. Asher yishkav es zachar, who has relations with a man, bein gadol bein katan. That means that the recipient of the avera can be a adult or a child. It's not relevant, right? It's the person who's doing the avera. Mishkivei isha, the types of having relations that you can have with a woman. It tells us that there are two types of relations which are prohibited by a woman. Because, as we're going to see in a moment, that a woman who's prohibited to a man, so then we know that you can't have relations with that woman. But how do we know that sodomy also counts as an avera that causes the same punishment of skila, right? If somebody has relations with his mother or has a sodomy relationship with one's mother, so it's the same punishment of skila from this, that it says mishkivei isha, that both of those are considered to be relations with women, and they are considered usher, both of them. Right, because that is considered to be valid relations. Amar Rabbi Yishmael says, Hareze bol lamed nimtza lamed. We thought this is something the pasuk is coming to teach us something, but actually it comes to learn something, but it's actually coming to teach us something. Meaning, obviously, when it comes to homosexual relationships, sodomy is the only way that this is going to take place. Therefore, what is this coming to tell us? That type of relations also is prohibited by a woman who's usher to him. So therefore, it's not only by a man, it's also by a woman that is considered relations and also prohibited. Mosu masu, the pasuk says, she shall surely die. Beskila, that means they're going to get skila. Ata omer beskila, you think it means skilo and abachas bikomisos hamors betorah. Or maybe it means one or the other, like we said, chenek, for example. Nemar kan, the pasuk says, demehem bam, their blood is on them. Nemar ba'ova yidoni, and it says by over yidoni, demehem bam, malaholam beskila, afkan beskila, it is going to be a skila punishment. We are nun dalad on a base. So onesh shamanu. So now that pasuk is telling us the punishment of skila for having homosexual relationships. Minayin. So ashara minayin. Where is the prohibition in the Torah? That's where these psukim come in. Okay, and the pasuk says Tama Lomar. These psukim are in Vayikra Yud Ches, right? Pasuk Chaf Beis. Ves zachar lo tishkav mishkevei isha toevahi. And it says like this: Ves zachar lo tishkav mishkevei isha toevahi. Right, a person should not live with a man like he lies with a woman. It is a disgrace. Lamanu azhara l'shochev. So that means that somebody who is the one, that's a shochev, right? So lo sishkav, right? That's this pasuk. So that means, and the punishment asher yishkav as ashas is zachar, like we said in pasuk in Chaf Yud Gimel, right? That we've said that. So lo sishkav. That's according to both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. We're going to talk about Rabbi Yishmael first, I believe. Lenishkav minayin. What is the source for somebody who is on the receiving end that he's also that's also an avera for him, and he also gets skila? Talmud lomar lo yia kadesh mi bnei Yisrael. You cannot be a kadesh, right? There should not be a kadesh in bnei Yisrael. The omer, and it says, what is kadesh? V'gam kadesh haya ba'aretz. Hasu kachol atovos hagoyim asher horish. Right? They also made a disgrace. Kadesh means not just holy, but it also means something that is separated. Right? They did that which is should be separated from amongst the Jewish people. It is in masculine form, indicating that the avera that was being done was homosexual relations. So they did that, and that means that somebody who's involved in homosexual relations, whether on the receiving end or on the giving end, because lo shishkav is the giving end, on the receiving end is lo yeh kadesh, which is a pasuk in Dvarim Chaf Gimel Yud Ches. So therefore, those two psukim together, differ Rabbi Yishmael. That's how Rabbi Yishmael holds to teach us the prohibition according to Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, Rabbi Akiva says, "Einot tzarich." No, I don't need this pasuk lo yeh kadesh. Harehu omer. The pasuk says, "V'zachar lo tishkav mishkevei isha kari be lo sishachev." The pasuk is lo sishkav. It can also be read. He has the yesh in the mikra and yesh in the mesores. He says the pasuk can be read. Also, you should not lie. Not you should not have relations with, but you should not. Also, it can be read as no one should have relations with you. So therefore, that pasuk means both lo shishkav, teaches me both the receiving end and the giving end. It's going to have a practical difference, right? Because if one is on the receiving end and the giving end, so then is it two separate averos or is it one avera? Because that's going to be our question. We're going to point that out. Behema minolon. What about with an animal? What's the source? Detona Rabbanan Rabbanan. Ish prat lekatan. Again, a man, it means not a child. Asher yitain shichvaso bebehema, ben gedol ben ketana. Right? It says any animal, whether the animal is large or small, most you must will die. Beskila ta omer. Right? So it says that this is asher yitain shichavto bebehema. That's the pasuk. Okay. That's the shochev. You say it's skilo and ola ba'achas mikol misos homos b'torah. You say it's skilo, but maybe it's one of the other misos. Nemar kan tehargo v'nemar lahalon ki harog targenu. Right, it says that you should kill him, and says all the places ki harog targenu malahalim b'skila, just like that is by skila. Afkan b'skila, this is also skila. So amanu onesh l'shochev. So that means that this is the punishment for the shochev. and asher, right? This is the onesh, is asher yitain shechavto. Onesh lenishkav minon. What about the person who is on the receiving end of an animal having relations? Tamad lomar kol shochev in behema mos yumas. Anybody who is kol shochev in behema dies. Tamad lomar, so he says, imeno inyan l'shochev, so he says kol shochev. We already know that shochev is prohibited because it says asher yitain shechav to behema. Teneo inyan lenishkav. So that means that this pasuk is applying to the person on the receiving end. So onesh bein l'shochev bein l'nishkav. So we've got a punishment for the person who is on the giving end, also on the receiving end by an animal. Ashara minayin. Where is the prohibition in the Torah? Tamad lomar. Therefore, we're going to go back to here by an animal. The ashara. So we're going to say that it means uvechol behema lo sitain shechav techol l'tama ba. So that means bechol behema you should not give lo sitain shechav techa. Both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel agree that is the prohibition. Lamanu ashara l'shochev. So that's the prohibition for the person who is on the giving end. What about lenishkav, the one who's on the receiving minayin? Tamar lomar lo yeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. That we're going to learn from this lo yeh kadesh. According to Rabbi Avoh, we're going to see that there's going to be another opinion of Abaye in a moment, but that's Rabbi Avoh, Bibnei Yisrael. V'omer v'gam kadesh haya ba'aretz. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yishmael says. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. He says, no tzorich, I don't need that pasuk, because again, he says, Harehu omer, lo sitain shechavtecha, and it says, which can be read, lo sitain shechiva secha. You should not be on the receiving, and you can reread the pasuk using different nekudos and be on the receiving end. So he says it's the same pasuk from the shochev and the nishkav. Habala Zachar, we'll try to just get to the last Rabbi Avoh points, if we can. So, Habala Zachar, Vehevia Love Zachar, or you know what, it's 9 o'clock. Are we going to have a minion here? Or so we better run to, does the Bayit have 9 o'clock?
Chabad is 9 o'clock. Yeah.
So we may have to go and have so we better stop here so we can head to other minion. Okay, so we'll stop here.
Okay.
We will pick up Emir Tzashem.
Thursday.
I believe, or Wednesday if I'm coming back early enough. I'll text everybody.
Oh yeah?
We'll see what I can do.
Okay.